Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Conder, founder and CTO here at Blue Modus. We're based in the United States. The topic I'm presenting today is called Using Kentico Xperience as a Rapid Development Platform. And basically, I'm going to focus on a couple things. Basically, our approach to moving fast, delivering value, and preparing for the future. There's also going to be a topic at the end where we'll talk about how we migrated a site from Kentico Xperience 12 to Xperience 13 with .NET Core. And so we learned some things there. So we also wanted to include some of that interesting info. So let's go ahead and get started. Basically, when we think about the term rapid development platform, the term itself is pretty self-explanatory, certainly. We've been working with Xperience 12 and MVC for nearly 2 years now, since November of 2018. During that time, we've launched over 30 different projects, and we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't, best practices, how to optimize. And some of the things that we've really focused on have been around the tools and processes that really minimize time to delivery. Obviously, there's a big change with MVC from Portal Engine. There's a large perceived drop in functionality out of the box, and we wanted to mitigate that as best we could. And some of the things we did there, we'll talk about today. So an overview of what a rapid development platform is really simple. It's basically just pre-built templates or patterns that can be leveraged. Now, typically, there's going to be downsides to rapid development platforms, and those are usually around limitations in the flexibility and also requiring certain practices and training and things like that. There's a whole plethora of different platforms out there. Kentico Xperience is not necessarily sold as a rapid development platform, but it can act as one because it's a really well-designed MVC implementation. And basically for our purposes, what we consider the ideal is a boilerplate starter kit that kickstarts your applications, but also gives you as much flexibility as you could possibly need. It also, hopefully, does not have a huge learning curve. So there's three main components of building an ideal boilerplate or starter kit. The first is spin up. So you want to have tools that will basically, as much as possible, become turnkey. So you have a way to quickly spin up a project, get all the little pieces together, things like dependency injection, caching, security, configuration, all those things, just make them automatically appear. And hopefully, if you can also do that, you look at the hosting environments too. So using like Azure hosting, for example, being able to spin and provision up those environments automatically. Now, the next step is once you have that turnkey startup in place, you want to be able to jump in quickly and make a difference quickly, especially when you have a tight timeline. So you want the code base to be intuitive and easy to work with. Love the idea of convention over configuration as much as possible. And really, we want to have the ability to support different content models. So one of the things that we really focus on is helping our clients develop a master content model that makes sense for their business today, but can also be used in the future. Certainly, there's going to be pre-built components, widgets, controllers, whatever that may be. Those components, if they're pre-built, they may not be able to be used without any modification, but hopefully you can repurpose them quickly and hit the ground running fast. Finally, it's ongoing automation. So you want to have provisioning, build, deploy processes, everything scripted. We use Cake, which is a C# based make script approach with PowerShell. It's really nice. We also have a process to use simple models for our code. I'll talk about that briefly. But one of the things we do is we auto-generate everything. So if you make any changes to the content model or to objects, those are automatically propagated into your code base without any manual intervention. Finally, you want to have test projects and all the basic tests that you need to ensure that your build scripts can check that your code is working. Oftentimes in smaller marketing websites that don't have a ton of complexity, you don't have as many unit tests or integration tests, but it is nice to have at least some of the basics out of the box. So at the end of the day, what we're really looking for is as much flexibility as we can possibly get with the automation, with the turnkey approach. And I think what's really important to consider is when you're looking at this rapid application development platform is the mindset. And for us, the mindset is iterate quickly and fast. Basically, take small pieces. Every project, you're going to find areas where you can identify certain things, maybe a script, maybe how you built the content model, whatever that may be. Look to extract those learnings and those things you've done and reuse those in the next time you do a project. For us, we invested pretty heavily for the first 6 months to a year of our MVC implementations, working really hard. We actually had an assigned product owner to our boilerplate, and that person was in charge of trying to extract as much value as they could from our process and our code so that we could reuse it. And now we're at a point essentially where everything's automated, it's turnkey. You have an entire working website with a single script. So we'll kind of talk through how that works. So a little bit about our boilerplate. So those three components, the first, the spin up. For us, it's really important that developers understand how to use this. So we have a repository that they can pull down. It has a detailed README with a markdown that explains exactly the steps they need to take and the configuration they need to identify when they're ready to go and spin up the site. We also have a database for Xperience sitting up in Azure, and it's pre-configured, optimized for the boilerplate, and ready to basically be duplicated and repurposed to a new site. So we have these automatic build scripts, and on the right you can see how this works. You run initialize project.ps1, and then it asks you, what's the name of the client, what's the name of the project, what year. The reason we have years in our project identifiers is because we often do many projects for individual clients or properties, so sometimes we have to differentiate those. And then the namespace. And so basically you type those in. In this case, we did Chester's Com 2020 and the namespace of Chester's. And then it goes and renames all the files, all the namespaces, and then downloads the database from Azure, restores it locally, gets the user configured and everything. And then it updates the database with all the relevant settings, such as the domains, that kind of thing. We're not currently dynamically pulling the license. That's a manual step right now, but there is an API to actually get licenses if you have the ability to do that. It also installs all the front-end build tools. So we have a very well-defined front-end build process. And how that works is the front-end team works in their folders using NPM and all their tools. There's a build script that will run and then copy those files to the back-end folders where appropriate. As part of that process, we actually also create dynamically using APIs. We create a static HTML site in Netlify. So Netlify is a really simple static site hosting tool that's really great because you hook it to a Git repo and then it'll run builds on your changes. And so our front-end team builds these front-end websites that are under password, and they act as our baseline HTML, which can be QA'd for accessibility and mobile and things like that. And then also they can be used as a reference when we're implementing it to the CMS. So it's a good A/B test. All this happens automatically. It took some time to build these scripts, but again, in many cases, a lot of these processes need to happen anyway. So if you have the mindset of trying to extract as much as you possibly can from your projects to apply to the next one, these are the kinds of things that can save a lot of time. Now, if you only do 1 or 2 or 3, large new projects a year, for example, there may not be as much value to automate as much as we have here. But in our case, we do quite a few projects, and we've also seen a shift in many cases where rather than the large monolithic massive project, many of our clients are looking to build microsites, looking to build more scalable, rapid development projects. And this approach works really well because it saves a lot of time. So the next step is jumping in. So again, this idea of convention over configuration is kind of built in. Everything we do, we try to keep it as intuitive and easy to duplicate as possible. Developer training time is minimal. This is one of the great things about the Xperience MVC implementation. It doesn't really have a lot of hard dependencies on the Kentico Xperience side of things. You have to understand some of the APIs if you need to pull data, for example, those kinds of things. But for the most part, you actually don't have to learn too much about Kentico. So any .NET developer who knows MVC can spin up very, very quickly. The patterns we use repositories and services, very similar patterns I know that are very common out there. But our approach is basically to treat Kentico as a data store as much as possible and minimize the customizations we have to do in the Kentico side of things. We have lots of pre-built components that can be used, adapted, and repurposed. We probably have designed at least 300 widgets over the last couple of years, and all kinds of other cool components, page templates, sections, that kind of thing. And so a lot of those can be dropped in. All of the infrastructure pieces, such as the caching layer, which is obviously can be a complex challenge, that's automatic. It all happens magically. There's really not a lot to it for the developers. They don't have to think about it too much. And then the structure of the project, as you can see here, is an example of some of the things you have. You have your controllers, you have your entire web project, your data, your tests are there, and all of your core data pieces are there as well. Now, if you look at the screenshot, if you're familiar with the iconography, the chesters.web on the very right there is actually a .NET Core website. So that's an example. We actually have that running, like I mentioned before. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So on the automation side, this is ongoing automation. So the POCO generator is huge for us, and it's kind of part of this tool we built called Catalyst. And what Catalyst is it's a data layer, and it lets you convert your normal queries. So use in Kentico's document API, you use the multi-document query. You give it parameters, and it returns you a data set of the results. What Catalyst does is it takes that data set automatically and turns it into hydrated POCOs. POCOs are plain old CLR objects, so they're just very simple classes. What's nice about POCOs is that they're lightweight. They can be serialized into JSON very easily, and they're just easier to work with than the full tree node objects that come out of Kentico. And so as a standard, we use these POCOs for all of our models. So from the perspective of the website, you basically never get tree nodes. It's not really aware of what tree nodes are. It just sees POCOs. One of the cool things that Catalyst also does is it supports robust content models, which again is very important to have a solid content model. And what Catalyst will automatically wire up all the relationships. So for example, if you had an article and you have related articles, or an article and the author of the article that's set up in Kentico to be related, Catalyst will actually do that automatically. A lot of the code to map objects and get related content, that's where a lot of time is spent in websites, where if you can find a way to automate this, and there's 1,000 ways to do it, this is how we did it. It works really well for us. That's kind of like A/B code, left-right code, that if you can automate that, you're going to save a lot of build hours and also QA hours, because you know that this works, because Catalyst has its own tests. We know that it works. It's in use in dozens and dozens of websites. And so from a developer perspective, they can focus purely on building the MVC front end, getting data out of Catalyst, and just working with that data. One of the other really nice things is cache dependencies, and that's a moderately complex challenge in some cases. You want to have a highly cached site, but you also want to responsive to changes. Catalyst is fully aware of Kentico Xperience's cache dependency model, and it follows that very closely. And so basically, the entire site's cached, but if you make a change anywhere, just those dependent items will be updated, and it won't invalidate everything. So that's really important. And again, this is basic A/B left-right stuff. We're pushing that downstream. We're not really thinking about that. We're able to focus more on the front end build. As you can see, this is an example of us generating the POCOs. There's an output folder of the chesters, and we generate a list of POCOs for each site. So the chesters is the code name for the site. And as you can see below, there's a page type hierarchy. And what this hierarchy does is it just shows you a visual representation. This is an HTML page that's created automatically to show you where things inherit from. One of the cool things about these POCOs is that the C# actually follows that inheritance model. So we have this idea of linkable, listable, and navigable item bases. And you can see, for example, a call to action inherits from listable, or a food detail page inherits from navigable. But your C# does that as well. So you can actually use pattern matching and base types in your calls. So when you get a list of base types, you may not know what kind of navigable it is, what kind of page it is, but you can use pattern matching to quickly strongly type that and send it off to the view. So that's a really nice feature as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the project. I know I've been talking more about rapid development platforms, and how we approach it. But in this particular project is for Chester's Chicken. Here in the US, fairly large. They're one of the largest franchises in the nation. They have over 1,000 locations. Their current website basically is aimed at providing menus and location information for customers. They needed to redesign a whole totally refreshed design and on a platform that could scale to their future. They want to really shift into digital and make a serious push into the digital space to support their franchisees, which is really important for them. So they wanted to go beyond just a marketing website and build a full-blown franchisee website. So they chose Kentico Xperience for the platform. They had actually been using Kentico to power another site that they own, which is called Bird Shack Chicken. And they had a lot of success with it. They liked the platform and they thought it would be good. And we helped them understand the scalability and future roadmap of Kentico and Xperience. And it really made it a no-brainer for them. So the site we built, we actually had a very tight timeline. Because of that timeline, we actually already have launched. We launched in October, earlier this month. And so we actually had to build the site in Kentico Xperience 12 MVC. But the plan was basically as soon as 13 is released, the official release version is out, then we want to go ahead and port it over to 13 because they wanted to set the stage for the future in .NET Core on the front end. And that was important to them. So in addition to the product info, the new site also incorporates a retail support center for all their hundreds of franchisees. And Azure Search powers that entire section of the site, allows login, user account management, all that kind of stuff. So what they really needed, and they came to us recently, as everyone I'm sure is aware, this has been a crazy year, and a lot of businesses right now are trying to adapt and react quickly to market changes. They needed to, they basically postponed their franchise conference and they made it online, but they needed a new website. They wanted to have the new website ready for the conference. And so we had about 8 weeks, 2 months to basically go from scratch to complete, including design, including content modeling, including content entry and development. They wanted the ability to easily create and edit content in the site with a very small marketing team. They only have a couple of folks. And they needed this robust behind the login search for the franchisees to find their materials. So what our game plan is we had to quickly create a strategy and a top-level content model. Those really go hand in hand, and they are tied to the UX and the front-end design as well. So all that is a kind of a parallel effort or set of efforts. The content modeling is really key because whatever the business drivers are behind the scenes, those have to be expressed in the content model, and then that's going to filter down to the actual UX and front-end design. And so we worked in that process. We worked quickly as we can. One of the cool things about having a boilerplate like we have is that we were able to spin that up in about 10 minutes, have the site up and running, and then start creating the content model in Xperience and have the code base work. So even though we didn't have a design, MVC and Kentico's implementation makes it really easy to decouple the content and the logic from the design. So we were able to get the dev team working sooner than before the design was even complete. And so basically, because we knew what the content model was, that was really informing design. And our plan was to move fast and just adjust in real time. Like I said, we wanted to move to Xperience 13 and .NET Core as soon as we possibly could, because they really want to set the technology stage for the future. And they wanted to kind of do this all at once. So creating a master content model, we've done a lot of, I certainly have presentations on this. This is really near and dear to our hearts. It's a critical step for businesses today. And really what the goal is to create a content model for the entire business, not just the web. Now, the reality is that the web is really the primary channel today for most companies, and that's fine. But the future is going to change. And there's been a lot of great content coming from the Kentico side of things in terms of content modeling. And so I won't get too deep into that here, but needless to say, in order to be successful and set the stage for the future, you have to have a good content model. You also have to have a good sense of how you're going to at least use that in your website, but in the future, you're going to see areas where that's going to be used in other channels. Now, we have a concept of these 3 common base types, and I wanted to mention this because I'm really curious to see what other partners are doing there. But in our experience with dozens and dozens of sites, these are universals, and they almost never change. There's some of these might have additional fields here and there, but that's about it. And the concepts are listable, navigable, and linkable. These are base types. You want to use common base fields as much as you can, and that shares the code base, makes it simpler to manage. Listable is something that would be listed, strangely enough. So listable, it has a title, subtitle, description, thumbnail image, that kind of thing. So those are some basic common fields, the title, the subtitle. I mean, those are basic things. Navigable takes it to the next step. Navigable is something you can go to. So it's a page, basically. A page is going to have more than listable. It will take the listable fields, title, subtitle, description, etc., add additional fields such as page copy HTML if there's a big block of rich text, maybe like a hero image, like a large image, and of course all of your open graph, schema.org, SEO fields, and all that. Many of which are already built into Xperience, so you can basically repurpose those. And then of course the Navigable is going to have a URL slug. You can use the node alias path, which is sort of the default approach. But if you want to localize that, or you have some custom logic for that, often you'll just create your own URL slug feature or field. And then finally, linkable is something that points to something else. So a linkable item could be like a call to action or a navigation item. Those are things that will point to somewhere. In many cases, they'll point to a document in the site, so another document somewhere in the site. In that case, we actually use the ID rather than the GUID, rather than the path, so that if the document ever moves, it won't break the link. Or that linkable could point to just an HTML URL. So it would be a Google page or something. Either way, the administrative interface is toggles that. So it's really easy for content editors to know they're pointing to a document or they're pointing to just a string for the URL. And the boilerplate automatically handles that logic as well. So these kinds of basic things we never have to think about. These are all part of our boilerplate. They always happen. And then of course we can build more specific page types on these. So for example, we might have a basic content page or a landing page or a home page. Those would inherit from Navigable, for example. Listable would be a call to action or all kinds of different things. Linkable would be navigation items, calls to action again. So basically using these base types, it saves a lot of time and energy. We also, you also want to really identify the needs for the page builder authoring experience, and that's going to be the page templates and widgets. What kinds of things can editors do to build their pages out? So our technology strategy was kind of three-pronged. The first was to just launch, in time for the conference with K-12, Xperience 12, MVC, and then give them as much flexibility as we can so they can actually start building landing pages and customize the UX and content for their authors or their audience. Phase 2, which is what we're in right now, we're going to convert to Xperience 13, which we've completed, although we're just waiting for the final release before we push live. And then we want to start leveraging Xperience Enterprise, formerly known as EMS, features for personalization and things like that. And since we have a really robust widget model, that's easy to do. Phase 3 is we're actually going to expose a content API. So this will become a headless CMS for them that's going to feed all into their properties and channels, including their sales teams, potentially including print, including at their locations. They have menu boards and things like that. That could be fed into those things. And at the end of the day, Xperience is becoming their central content repository for the entire business, which is really exciting. So the UX and design, we totally rebranded it, focused on a component-based approach. Again, we wanted to give them lots of flexibility to build the pages. So all the components are smart components. They work well together, and you can basically use Lego blocks to build the entire site, fully responsive. Some of the authoring features, if you see the UX here, you can see this is in Xperience 13. All the pages allow for widget customizations. We reuse content. We do not put content in properties of widgets in general. We have built custom selectors like tree node selectors and things that allow you to pick the things you want the widgets to display, or the categories, or the taxonomy, whatever it may be, and also maybe change the layout options here and there. And that's important. Again, we're looking for the future. We're not just building the website. We want to build a platform that allows them to reuse this content on multiple channels in the future. The content itself is highly structured, and relationships are easy to manage. Again, we've created custom field editors to create relationships very similar to how Kentico content works. So you can link to other pages, you can edit them inline, you can drag and drop their order, and it stores the IDs, and then Catalyst will automatically hydrate those POCOs. You can see we have a full content library folder that you can point to, and everything is kind of tied to that. Another nice thing is globals. So just as part of our boilerplate, globals are built in. There's an actual content type for site settings, and you can have all your global elements like your navigation, your page not found text, your cookie consent text, what's the default page search size. Those kinds of things are easy since Catalyst handles all the coding. We just add those fields in Xperience, and then basically they're accessible in the development side of things. And of course, SEO and accessibility are taken care of. This is really important. One of the things as we move forward, I was just reading the other day that a lot of lawsuits here in Colorado against restaurants because accessibility issues. And so it's definitely, we've had some other clients that have had some challenges with that with properties not built on Kentico. So not giving them the ability to break these things is really important, but also making sure they're optimized is important as well. So the site launch, just a quick rundown of how this broke down. The strategy UX content model design took about 4 weeks total. The actual development was about 2 weeks, followed by a QA cycle, 3 weeks. So this entire site took basically 2 developers 2 weeks to do. And that was to do everything. That's because we have this boilerplate. And so again, if you can find ways to reuse and create rapid development tools, you're going to save a lot of time and energy. You're also going to increase quality, and that's really important because you're not reinventing the wheel every time. You're using tried and true components that work. Content entry was concurrent with dev, which is really cool. Again, we created the content models quickly. They didn't have visuals, but they were able to enter the content and import it in. And then we just had the final deployment and tweaks. So at the end of the day, we hit the target. Not only did we build a website, but now they have an enterprise content management system that will feed other channels in the future. So here's the twist. We couldn't build it in Xperience 13, but we went ahead and converted it using the betas. And I want to just share a little bit of the things we learned. Hopefully this helps you if you're going to consider migrating. These are the key pieces, and I'd be happy to talk about this more in detail if you want to reach out to me later on. But you have the startup aspects, so all the dependency injection and all that kind of stuff, the configuration, that is moderately complex to migrate. You have the app settings, very simple. That's going from web config to app settings.json. Repository service and models, again, very simple. It's still C#. It's the same kind of approach, pretty minor. There's a couple of new injected providers coming out of Kentico Xperience. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. The views, they're all Razor views. That's easy. Where it gets a little more complex is the child actions and the widgets, because basically child actions no longer work in .NET Core. So you have to use view components. That's the primary way to do that. And so you really have to convert these to view components. And this can be difficult because view components have some limitations in the way that you send route parameters over. So this is probably, I'd say, the biggest effort you'll be looking at. Sections and all the custom modules and all that, they're typically pretty much the same. There's really not a lot of changes from 12 to 13 that you have to really deal with. So that was pretty straightforward. A couple of additional goodies that I just wanted to point out. First, because we have Catalyst, we actually have a full featured content API automatically. You can see the URL here where it's going to edge/API, and then you say system.type, Chester's.article, and you get the content. That's really exciting because we actually follow the same pattern, the REST pattern that Kentico content does. And so we have basically a headless API that's just bolted on. There's no work. Now they can add additional features or custom APIs, but this Edge API that we've created, it's just a drop-in NuGet package, basically turns the entire system into a nice, fully hydrated, fully relationship graph API. It doesn't use GraphQL quite yet, but it's basically an API that will give you fully hydrated graphs out of the system. And then the other cool thing, which I thought was just amazing and very, very neat and interesting, is we're running the K13 site in an app service using Docker on Linux. So it's actually running on Linux and Azure SQL. So we're not running Linux SQL on Linux, just Azure, but thought that was pretty cool. So at the end of the day, the result, we had a successful launch. It was on time and on budget. We got it out on time for their conference, had great feedback from the conference attendees. And right away, they've seen a pretty big decrease in bounce and an increase in pages per session, which is important metrics for them. But I think the most important thing is that even though we move fast, because we've invested, because we have a lot of these tools, we set the stage for a multi-channel content platform for them for years to come. And they have a lot of really cool ideas in the future. And so we're really excited to help them. So that concludes my presentation. I hope this is interesting for you. Again, I'll be online in the conferences, but also if you'd like to email me, dconder@bluemodus.com, I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks so much.